With golden shadows, echoes in the night, soft and haunting, flickering light, strings pull tight.
Hello, welcome to the second episode of the podcast, The Core of the Matter, in which we talk with interesting people around Maryville University about interesting things that have to do with culture and history and just what's going on around campus. And with me here today, I'm Jess Bowers, Associate Professor of English, and with me here today is Dr. Germaine Murray, Professor of English, and she teaches a course on ghost stories here at Maryville. And so we felt that for spooky season, it made sense, it made perfect sense to have a conversation about ghosts and all sorts of things about ghosts today. We want to talk about their cultural significance. We want to talk about ghost stories in literature. We want to talk about the history of ghost traditions, all sorts of things. So we are ready to talk about all things spooky and ghosty. And Germaine, what is your interest in ghost stories in particular?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm interested in a lot of genre development, as you know, I always have been. And I teach another class. A couple of different classes on detective fiction and how the detective form came about. And it seems to me that at the very same time that the detective story was coming about, the modern ghost story was in formation. And that is that's like in the very early part of the 19th century.
Yes.
And so I thought, this is the other side of the coin. So I'm really going to investigate this. And I also love ghost stories, and I love also ghost stories from other traditions. And so I always have. When I was doing my dissertation and when I did my book, I was really fascinated by the Puritan interest in the supernatural and the way they conceived of the supernatural and how different it was from other religions. And so it's always been an abiding sort of interest. And so that's why I teach this class, and we get into all kinds of areas. It sort of crosses over with horror. Last night we just did with Dr. Santa Roche-Papai, we just did in the Maryville Talks movies, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is sci-fi horror. And so a lot of what I do crosses over into so many different areas. And so that's why I love talking about these things, because oftentimes ghost stories are a bellwether. Especially when they enter the literary tradition, and they're a middle class genre too, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
So when you speak of ghost stories as a bellwether, it's sort of this idea. I do a lot of genre study stuff myself, and how genres kind of go in cycles, right? Different genres have different lengths of time when they're popular and when they sort of go away for a while and then come back again. And I know one of the things in genre discourse that we talk about a lot is the way in which genre is tied to cultural and political happenings in the world. And so these generic cycles, a genre like the ghost story could mark, certain parts of cultural history where people are feeling certain anxieties or certain fears, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that what you mean when you say bellwether?
Bellwether, yeah. Usually what happens is, and you know about this too, with the Gothic, the rise in the Gothic really happens right in the 18th century.
Yes.
And what's happening in the 18th century? Well, the Industrial Revolution, which we throw around a lot, but what we don't really talk about is how it completely transformed the physical landscape and how it also transformed the concept of the city. Becomes urbanized. Not all cities are urban, but it becomes mechanical as well. It becomes technologized. So all of this morality and ethics and emotion and psychology always lag behind technological development.
That's so true.
And so one of the things that literature and art, as you know, this is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
One of the things that literature and art does is it somehow it has those antennae out where it touches upon even pop culture as well, touches upon what the anxieties are what the situations are that are bothering people, and it comes out then, I think, in the popular culture. A lot of really good literature was first popular.
Yes.
And everybody forgets that, because
do.
we tend to think that everything is so highbrow, and it's really not. And that's why I'm also very interested in these genre studies, because the ghost story essentially followed the Industrial Revolution and in its development in many ways. There have always been ghost stories, but technology is really and also the technologizing of the environment.
Yeah. London becoming smoggy and foggy and
overcrowded,
unrecognizable,
and a new kind of poverty, and a new kind of exploitation,
socioeconomic unrest.
Exactly, all kinds of stuff. And also, it's a middle class genre, because the haunted house genre, for example, of ghost stories is often about how the house, the home, is now invaded by, not always, but by a bad entity, or it can be also a warning kind of entity. But the house nowhere is safe.
Right. The domestic space.
Yeah, the domestic space. That's right.
Supernatural and unsettling. Right.
That's right.
And then also you have these curses and things on these houses, right? Because one of the things that I love about the Gothic is that it really has its roots in haunted house, right? With Castle of Otranto and Horace Walpole. The story of the first Gothic novel is that Horace Walpole was remodeling his house. And when you remodel your house, suddenly you have a real sense of the uncanny, of the familiar made strange, right? And everything was in disarray. And he started writing about, well, what if there was something supernatural in this creepy part of my house? And then that's really where the entire Gothic genre emerges. So ghosts are very tied into the roots of the Gothic genre too.
Oh, absolutely. And then what happens is, Gothicism never goes away. It's still with us, which I'm so pleased that it is. It never goes away, but it too is about anxiety.
Yes.
Ghost stories are frequently, and horror stories are frequently about some sort of cultural or individual psychological trauma that people share with one another.
Ah, yes.
And they recognize it. And so that's why I say it's also a bellwether. It's a way of, because what we really have in the ghost story genre is a kind of psychological experiment. And especially in the late 19th century, I just finished teaching The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yes.
And people forget that it's a ghost story. And it preceded it's the story that he used to sort of figure out how he was going to write a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And so it's about, by the way, that very tumultuous period when grave robbing and resurrection men were extremely common. And it's also about class, because the doctors get away with it.
Yes.
The grave robbers do not, and they're lower class. And so but again, he's exploring what the corruption within the society, especially the medical culture, if you will, and also that the fact, once again, that the ethics and the morality and the law had not caught up with where medicine was going.
Yeah.
And so there's a catch-22 in here. And by the way, that harms a society, because you trust your doctors.
You do.
And you put your life in their hands. And so he's exploring the whole idea of conscience, and in that particular story, and class. And boy, Robert Louis Stevenson is so good.
He is.
And
wonderful.
But it's a lovely story. And then the adaptation is a very interesting film with Val. Val.
Yes, the Val Lewton. It's Robert Wise is the director, right?
Yeah. When I tell my students Robert Wise, they're like, I go, he's the guy that directed The Sound of Music. They're like, what?
Yeah, but he's actually The Body Snatcher. It's an excellent sort of horror film with incredible performances as well.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's an underrated.
But
film.
It is a ghost story.
Yeah.
It is a ghost story. It's because at the end, Gray, I probably shouldn't
spoil
Spoil
the
it.
movie from the
Gray
1940s.
seems to appear, and the story itself, both of the characters see Gray appear, but in the Val Lewton film, Boris Karloff is so fantastic.
Oh
in that
gosh,
movie.
he's so good in that.
He's
So good in everything.
He
but
really
in
is.
that, it's like you really get to see him. I love his role in that movie so much more than, like what he did with Frankenstein's
me too.
monster, because
I do
you
too.
actually get to see
The acting.
his acting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bela Lugosi takes that small part.
Yes.
But so that was really interesting because I used that story because I have so many PTs in my class, and I have also pre-meds in my class.
So it's relevant
and
to
so
their...
and I tried it. And by the way, they are like, I had no idea about
Wow.
any of this. And again, that's where the ghost story comes from. That's where it comes from. Some sort of trauma. Grave robbing was a societal trauma.
Yeah.
Which turned into murder and serial murder.
Right.
So yeah, and that's what he's tapping into. And ghost stories generally tap into that kind of societal trauma, which then he gets down to the individual level too. What the other thing that people rarely talk about is that the ghost story tradition, especially when it begins in the Gothic tradition and also in the 19th century, a lot of women entered the fray with regard to authorship by writing ghost stories.
Yeah.
And they were very successful. And I think it'd be really interesting to talk about the difference between a male and a female ghost story.
Oh, I would love to know.
Yeah, they're very different. Men, women their ghosts tend to be, and I'm generally speaking, more benign.
Oh.
And more benign, and by the way, sort of warning from the other side, or seeking help from the other side. The male ghost story is generally speaking a lot more. It's more on the demonic side, or on the just completely dislocating side. So I think that's really interesting.
looking to possess or destroy.
Yeah, right.
Versus
it's interesting.
warning or
and by the way, that isn't the rule, but that's a generalization that does work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
Oh, I love the difference. Like, for example, there's a little story, and I can't remember the name of it. Is it Oliphant? I think it's Oliphant. She wrote a story called The Open Door. And The Open Door is about this young boy who is, it's a wonderful story, the ghost of a young boy who lives in this old rundown ruin. And the little boy who lives down the lane, if you will, hears him and tells his father, and begins to waste away because he feels so badly for this little boy who's calling out to him. And it's actually about fatherhood, because the father believes the boy.
Wow.
And so that's a rare thing.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual story, and it's about how they've got to listen to the boy, and they've got to do something to
help
understand the history of that child who is that ghost, that child's ghost that's still living in that ruin.
Wow.
And so it's much more about a family and relational dynamic and getting the truth out than it is about horror.
Right. Yes.
Which is but by the way, it's scary at the same time, because you got this wasting away boy.
Yeah.
And
students
are like,
eerie,
oh my God.
eerie voice. And
yes. And that sobbing child.
Right.
Yes.
But that's really interesting. So the ghost almost becomes a device so that the family can get at what they need to
Precisely.
discover. Right.
Precisely.
Yeah. I'm always so fascinated, too, how so many ghost stories have this, that the ghost just wants to be known. right? That they want their story to be told, right?
Right.
Which I think is just such an interesting trope that doesn't really come up in any of the other horror subgenres,
No,
Like you'll
no.
never have a vampire just wanting their story to be
Yeah,
told.
I just want people to know.
Right.
In
But,
fact,
like,
the vampire
ghosts-
doesn't want anybody to know.
Yeah, and then it's frequently that the ghost needs to tell their story in order to be released or in order to move on, or it's a really interesting kind of liminal genre in that way.
Oh yeah. What I
Yeah.
always tell students, the other thing is because of how the ghost story is a bellwether and often in a culture, it's also about how as industrialization and technologization take off and become so part of our everyday existence and in fact second nature. The Romantics always said we were losing touch with our natural origins,
Yes.
and also with our imaginations,
Yes.
and with our creativity. And I always they're totally right. Of course they're totally right. But that's what the ghost story is about. The ghost story is about saying the world of the imagination, that liminal world,
Right.
The world of the spirit, if you will. Some people, that invisible world is as real
Yes.
as the physical world,
The tangible world.
the tangible world. And what a certain attitude toward science has done is it has said none of that really exists.
Right.
What they're really taking issue with in a lot of ghost stories is this deterministic kind of materialism.
Yes.
That reality is only the material, that the body is only so much material.
Right.
And so it's a pushback against that.
And a pushback, I think, against the idea that the world is knowable.
Right.
Because I think about the Industrial Revolution
Correct.
and how, we start to see Britain really establishing itself as the major world power through their Industrial Revolution. And there really is a sense that, like, through technology, we can know all things.
There will be no
right?
mystery.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then here comes the ghost story to say, well, actually, there are parts of the world that are ineffable. There are parts of the world that you cannot know fully. And I think that's so interesting. It's another example of humanity's kind of tempering what science is doing. And the important role of the humanities in doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then it comes before even the humanities, the literature, art, music.
Yeah.
It comes way even before the sort of coalescing of the social scientific disciplines. Like psychology then tries to psychologize that world,
The supernatural.
as well. And it becomes, and this is the late 19th century,
Right.
and so and the early 20th century. People forget Freud is a late 19th century guy.
Yeah, he is.
Exactly. And so it's such an interesting form. It's highly entertaining. It's got aspects of the thriller. It's got suspense. It's got utter creepiness. But also really good ones are about something beyond just those things.
Right, which is true of, I think, all genres, right?
Really
it's
good
like
ones.
really good genre fiction is always about something other than what it seems to be about, right?
Yeah,
At first
yeah.
glance.
It
right?
definitely is.
And that's one of the reasons I love genre fiction so much, is because I really feel like, again, that popular aspect of it, it allows it to get at things societally that, something more quote unquote highbrow might not explore.
I agree. My students, this was really funny. I started the semester off in the ghost story class talking about, we did Hamlet, which is so intimidating to so many students. And I say, you realize this was the popular culture of its day.
It was.
And so I go into that a lot. And then I say, here's how we're going to teach this. It's a ghost story.
Right.
Everything turns on that ghost. Without the ghost, none of it happens.
True.
And so no one, and by the way, when I was learning Shakespeare, nobody talked about it that way.
No. Yeah.
And
same.
by the way, it becomes so much more comprehensible to them when you put it in that particular genre. He knew exactly what he was doing dramatically, but he also knew a lot about ghosts,
Right.
for his own time. He knew a lot about. Shakespeare knew a lot about how people viewed them, and so we had a number of presentations on good commentary about the Ghost of Hamlet, and that is the key to the whole play. And they loved the story after that. You can't. It's the other reason why I like to teach genre too is it's a way to get them to read great stuff that they wouldn't pick up on their own, but they're interested in the ghost itself and where they come from, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera.
And ghost stories are something
Very
that
few people-
everybody knows.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's an easy way in. One of the things that I was interested in, Germaine had sent me a list of ghost stories prior to meeting today. And I was surprised to see a story by E. Nesbit on the list because my personal knowledge of Edith Nesbit, right, is 5 Children in It and Phoenix in the Carpet and the Story of the Amulet, like these wonderful,
terrific stories.
fantastical Victorian children's stories, right? So I was surprised to find out that she also wrote ghost stories.
Oh, she did.
Yeah.
And in England, as you know, they still talk about ghost stories and tell ghost stories during the Christmas season.
Oh, yes, the Christmas Carol.
So
yes.
E. Nesbit used to, it was a way for her to make an easy buck to support her kids. And so she wrote a really terrific story called Man-Sized Marble, where these 2 Norman knight effigies on Halloween night detach from their marble edifices and rampage the countryside.
They do?
Yes.
That's terrifying.
And by the way, kill a woman. Yes.
Because you can't stop them. They're made out of marble.
Yeah, exactly. Man-sized marble.
Wow.
And they detach themselves and they rampage around. It's a fantastic story. And they end up killing a woman. But the story, again, is about the marital relationship of the woman who is killed. She has a very infantilizing husband, and the husband doesn't believe her when she has this strong sense of intuition about this place in which they're living, and the husband doesn't believe their housekeeper. And so he's
just
dismissive it off. You know what's wonderful?
Yeah.
What's wonderful is the students pick up on that right away. The other thing that E. Nesbit wrote that story for, and you'll love this. You'll love this. She wrote that story to pay homage to Mary Shelley. Because the death scene of the wife is exactly the death scene of Victor Frankenstein.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and it's clear that she had it in mind. So it's definitely fan fiction.
Very cool.
It's
very cool.
It's definitely fan fiction. I'm like, this can't be a coincidence.
No.
So I compared the 2 passages, and it's not a coincidence.
It's an homage.
And it's an homage. It's for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, Victor Frankenstein leaves his wife.
He does.
On their wedding night.
Well, I always read and teach Frankenstein as a novel about bad dads, right? Because once you know,
compartmentalize.
Yeah, and compartmentalizing and not wanting to share, emotions. And really, I mean, the crux of Frankenstein is, a man tries to create life without a woman. And Shelley makes sure that she tells you over and over again throughout that novel that this is an abomination.
Yes,
right?
that you participate. Yeah, women are more closely tied to generation than
than the man. And
absolutely,
and Victor's just the consummate bad dad. He just abandons the creature immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm interested though in these marble these marble ghost men. Okay, right?
You would love it.
Yeah, I've got it here on my.
And she dies, by the way. Nobody believes.
Ah.
So this is wonderful. So they live near this old Norman church that nobody goes to anymore because it's Catholic.
Right.
So
the Gothic Catholic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Nesbitt's really doing some very interesting subversive kinds of things. So and by the way, M.R. James does the same thing. He in many of his ghost stories, the European or English landscape is a haunted landscape, not because of necessarily physical ghosts, because of the violence and the exploitation and the prejudice that has taken place on that landscape. And no one has ever countenanced or hasn't been countenanced fully enough.
Right. And so the landscape itself is traumatized.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the Norman Knights, who had to have been Catholic, by the way,
right,
they go on the rampage, and there is this, and by the way, the whole area knows that this is the legend. This new interloper into this area says, this village says, I don't believe any of them, blah, blah. He's a painter. His wife is this is what I find interesting. His wife is a successful writer.
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
And selling things right and left. And so he goes out one night and their housekeeper won't stay in the house on October 31st. So he goes out and she said, I wish you wouldn't go. I just wish you'd hang out.
Right.
And he goes. And he goes to the church. He goes inside the church. He sees these two knights are gone. And he suddenly panics and says, oh my God.
She's right.
She's right.
Yeah.
And tries to go back. And then he meets up with a friend of his. The friend of his says, this can't be real. So they go back to the church. The two knights are back. He goes home, finds her dead with a stone finger in her hand.
It's so great. Oh, that's so great.
And if somebody could film
I'm
that.
going to read it. Tonight. So are these ghosts are corporeal, aren't they? Like they're capable of killing her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah. And they used to inhabit the place where they live now. And every 31st they come back. But it's also a way of her sort of this landscape is sort of haunted by its Catholic past as well. It's just very, very, her stories, she's really good.
She is really good.
Her children's literature and her young adult literature is marvelous.
Yeah, absolutely.
She could do anything
as a kid.
She could do anything.
I didn't realize that she was multi-talented. I just knew that I loved those books when I was a kid.
I do. So I still like them.
I'm excited to delve into her ghost stories.
Yeah, they're fun.
That's really exciting. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and one of the things that I know about ghosts is that the ghosts in Nesbitt's story, they're corporeal, they're able to affect the world around them, right? And one of the things that's really interesting about the history of ghosts is that we have this sense nowadays of ghosts in the Ghostbusters sense, right?
Right.
That you can see through them and that they can pass through solid material and that they may or may not be able to make contact with humans in a physical way, right? And one of the things that I've always found really interesting is that the idea of the incorporeal ghost really emerged at the same time as the introduction of the magic lantern, which was this early proto-cinematic technology. So it wasn't until people saw translucent, shimmering images that they started to think, well, maybe ghosts are like that. Which I think is such an interesting
because
thing.
Medieval ghost stories, like English medieval ghost stories and even continental medieval ghost stories, the ghosts are more corporeal.
Yes.
And by the way, the same is true for Roman and classical Greek ghost stories. The ghosts are more corporeal. Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems like a person is actually
so the
there.
magic lantern, definitely. And you can also imagine
the phantasmagoria.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
I love I love the whole. You know what we've got to do?
Mm.
We've got to talk about the magic lantern sometime in a separate.
Oh yeah,
We've got to talk about the whole
proto cinema. It's like jam.
That sounds fun to do.
Yeah, I got all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, because I want to work on. I have a project I want to do at the City Museum about magic lantern slides. And so yeah, it's a cool project. But
Very
anyway,
cool.
That's absolutely true. The other thing, another interesting distinction is medieval and pre-Protestant Revolution ghosts tended to be, not always, not when you bring in the Norse tradition into the English tradition, because the Norse ghost tradition is scary. It's scary. It's just really weird.
Like what?
Ghosts are not good.
No.
At all. But the English tradition, they're generally speaking, in the Catholic English tradition, they're generally there to warn people, to help people, to tell them to get on the straight and narrow, et cetera, et cetera. But after the Protestant Revolution, and this is why M.R. James is such an important ghost story touchstone, after the Protestant Revolution, ghosts become all bad, generally speaking.
Really?
Yeah, generally speaking.
Do you think that's tied to sort of the Gothic tradition's weird suspicion of Catholicism?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the things.
Right, yeah. Because one of the hallmarks of the Gothic tradition is that the old world is creepy.
Popery.
Right, yeah.
Popery and all of its interesting sacramentals.
Right, yes. And that they really do cast the Catholic Church as Gothic and creepy.
Absolutely.
Right? Which it does have elements.
Well,
that
the
are
monk.
very Gothic. Yeah, the monks. Yeah, the monk. Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, it's a great
I love that book. Yes, Matthew Lewis.
Well, all of it's, by the way, that stuff is pretty arcane.
Yes.
I mean, so you can, but I also think it's the Protestant Revolution, the real, how should I say, I think the most influential ideology coming out of the Protestant Revolution, at least, and I can say this from a literary standpoint, I think is Puritanism.
Yes.
And that was I know you're going to be shocked when I tell you this, but that was a real major area of inquiry. That's what I wrote a book on.
Yeah.
Is the Puritan influence on point of view in the American and British novel. And what's really interesting to me is in British novels, they managed to sort of stave it off. In America, we don't stave off that Puritan
we do not.
Puritan influence. But the Puritans, everything is bad. Everything liminal, generally speaking, is pretty bad.
Right. For Puritans, absolutely. Right. They want things black and white, good and bad. Right.
And it's one of the most influential ideologies. And so it transforms everything.
It does.
And it's something we don't talk about in the United States anymore, and we should, because it's still
don't.
Here.
Yes, it's very much still here.
But so the ghost stories really do change. As a result of that.
Where do you think the ghost story is in 2024? Or is there anything about our particular cultural moment that is stirring up ghosts and making people think about ghosts?
Well, I think I think we if you look, by the way, at film, by the way,
yes,
we're fascinated with it.
Paranormal activity.
Absolutely. We're absolutely fascinated with it. And one of the things I think is interesting too is this whole fascination. It's funny how we're in the first podcast we talked, I don't know if we talked about this or not, but I also think that the kind of technology that's asserting itself as this sort of messianic savior.
Yes.
We've got this techno kind of euphoria going on. I think ghost stories are very suspicious of all of the AI stuff. And it's because, well, it's like the Ghost in the Machine.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I do think that's where the ghost story and where cinema has been going.
Right.
Horror is definitely going in that direction.
Yeah.
Because here's what I think no one is talking about. You and I have talked about this, but what no one this is why cultural criticism is so important, and this is why one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I think one of the reasons why we don't have these conversations about AI is because, especially in the United States, is because we're so enraptured with technology.
Oh, yeah.
And it's going to save us or something.
There is definitely that sense.
And by the way, that
American
goes back
culture.
from the very
it sure
to the very
does.
beginning. And I really do think that it's a serious cultural flaw,
Mm-hmm.
and it just keeps getting worse. But here's what I also think. I think really good writers, Neil Gaiman, for example, I think they realize that if you really think that AI is going to become conscious, then you don't know what consciousness really is.
Right, right.
And by the way, neuroscientists would say we don't really know
No, we
what
don't.
consciousness
We don't.
is. We are trying to understand it. So it's again the technology and the expectations of the technology are so far beyond
what's actually possible.
what the philosophy.
Right.
But I think this is where literature and film and art will be touched. I think they're starting to touch on it.
Right, to
very
comment
closely.
on it
Yes.
or wonder
Explore it.
or ask what this
Wonder.
means. Right, yeah. What does this mean?
Wonder instead of saying, oh,
Right.
I watch those Mark Cuban ads and I just go, is he on something? Gemini is going to knows everything? I mean, really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's scary stuff.
It is. It is.
I mean, if I think of a movie like Minority Report, even
Yes.
You're just going.
Yes.
And I remember thinking this will never happen. It happens.
And it was weirdly prescient.
Enemy of the people, those kinds of things. So I actually think that's where the story is. I think ghost stories are they're around.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a genre that's just perennially interesting to humans because we can never really know what happens after you die. Like
No.
we will never really know. We have theories.
That's really basically, isn't that really what it's about?
Yeah.
It really is about. Well, when Hamlet says there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your philosophy can teach us. By the way, that is sort of the subtext
of ghost
stories, all ghost stories, and by the way, of human existence.
Yes. Yes.
So he's very. Now, Shakespeare didn't start the ghost story, but by God,
he's a master.
He certainly popularized the form. And then, with Macbeth as well.
Yeah, I think about Macbeth as well. Yeah. And how Banquo's ghost is the heart and soul of that play, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
And how, by the way, even in Shakespeare's time, the ghosts are tied to the psychology of the protagonist.
Yes, because it's supposed to appeal to his conscience, right? And he can think of what
And
he's
the ghost
done.
appears to Hamlet, and Hamlet is in a terrible state when the ghost appears to Hamlet, and this just makes things spiral out of control.
Right.
That's what also is really interesting about the ghost story, because in the later 19th century and in the early 20th century, the ghost story begins to really concern itself with the psychology of the protagonists much more. And this is why, I don't know, have you ever read Turn of the Screw?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that whole book turns on her psychology.
It really does.
and that is Henry James, who is, he is reading the contemporary psychological tracts, and he's incorporating them into this story. And this is one of his great stories.
Oh yeah, he never gets any of the criticism that he gets elsewhere for Turn of the Screw. No one talks about that one being verbose or no. And it's a very lean story for him as well.
For him, it's a very lean story. But when you start to really look at her and how her psychology is described. And, he had apparently a really difficult governess and experience. And by the way, his brothers and sisters did. And so it's actually that story is actually based on a real incident that he heard over dinner and over, I think, a glass of sherry with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who told him about something that he had run across and how it haunted him.
Oh.
And that's where he
That's
got
what
the
sparked
idea of
the
this
story.
governess who takes these two children and is very untested. And it's the most, he said, I got to write this story.
Right.
Furthermore, he wanted to try his hand at a ghost story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is it's a highly psychological kind of ghost story.
It is very right. Well, that's always James's interest. Is in
Yeah,
psychology.
he really goes into such depth.
Mhm.
My students are always like, my God, he describes what she's thinking. And I go, right. I said, it's one step away from stream of consciousness. He's so, at least indirect stream of consciousness. So he's really
in her.
That's a wonderful story. And then what I pair with that is the Jack Clayton film, The Innocents.
Right.
With Deborah Carr, which is, I think, one of the greatest ghost films I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That's an incredible movie. It's an incredible movie.
Mm.
So that they're going to watch it. It always creeps people out too.
Ah, well, when they're watching it in the ghost story class?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We've had it in the series.
Oh, in Maryville Talks
We
Movies.
have had it in the series, and they were really creeped. Well, it's highly psychologized, obviously, and it's also Freudian, and which is Jack Clayton's and the screenwriters. But it's such a great movie. It's so well shot. It's. I think it might be up there in the top 5 ghost stories.
Wow.
Film ghost stories. Anyway, yeah.
High praise.
Yeah, it's my top 5 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Ghosts.
Well, this has been terrific.
Yeah,
I've
learned
go
a
on for
ton.
another hour.
I've learned a ton about ghosts. And I just think there's such a fascinating type of character to build a story around. And as with all sort of creatures of genre fiction, the meaning changes over time. Sort of, what does the ghost mean?
That's exactly right.
Which I think is one of the coolest things about these genre characters, right, is that when you really dig into the literature under vampires, under ghosts, you realize, wow, this is sort of an all-purpose symbol that embodies different anxieties or different fears as culture continues. So I'm really excited to see where the ghost goes in the critiques of technology.
I think it's going to happen. I also think, too, we're going to see. I'm just predicting here, so there's no proof in this, but I think all of the societal turmoil is going to produce it, not just like Escape from New York kinds of things,
right?
but it's going to produce really creepy stuff.
Yeah,
and it's because it's also a way, in a way. Ghost stories and horror stories in general are a way to get that anxiety out in some way.
Right, to sort of exercise it or release
Art said
it.
something really interesting last night when we were talking about the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978 one. He said something really interesting to the students. He said, have you guys ever heard of Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Yeah. And they were like, yeah. And he said, well, that's really over the top. It's pretty gory. It's pretty gross. But he said, one critic has said that if you understood what the war pictures coming out of Vietnam looked like before they changed how they covered that war, then you get the context of that movie.
Imagery.
And I thought, I'd never thought of that.
Wow.
And he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right. So even I'm not one that loves gore and all that kind of stuff. But I do have a different perspective on it because it's somehow mirroring something.
Right. It's not gore happening for the sake of gore. Yeah. It's gore that means something.
Yes. Right. And so, by the way, that one little thing I went, I have never thought about it that way.
That makes the movie so much more powerful.
I think so too.
It really does.
Because that is just like a cult. Certain people
people
really love that movie, and I've always been going, what?
Well,
I get it.
I get it. Yeah, that's really cool.
So it's true. Horror and ghost stories. It's true. I remember because you were not born yet. But when I was little, you could watch the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I should not have been watching it because you could see things that a little 8 and 9-year-old should
Shouldn't
not be
see.
seeing.
I
And
had
then they
a-
changed
yeah.
something happened. I forget which battle it was. And something happened and they changed the way they
Cover it.
brought the war to you. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I still have some of those images
Yeah.
in my head. I still remember seeing the My Lai massacre aftermath.
Oh God.
And I was a child.
Right.
And that is horror.
And
and so when he said that last night, I just was like, oh my God.
I get it now.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good insight that I'm going to be playing more with, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fascinating.
No, it's a fun subject.
Yeah.
And again, it's a way to get students to read some really good things.
Really cool stuff.
And to sort of, I always talk about their quiver of knowledge. They all laugh, but the more you read,
yeah, the more arrows you have in your quiver,
quiver.
of knowledge. That's right. That's right.
So I really appreciate us getting together. And
Oh
doing this
yeah,
thing.
this has been so fun. So what's next on the Core of the Matter?
I think we're going to do, we got 2 things coming up. Kent Bousman's going to do, we're going to talk about the sociology of baseball.
Right, yeah.
And then I think Dr. Wickersham, I'd really love to get him to tell some of his real ghost stories and all of his travels in the West.
Yes.
Because here's the cool thing about American ghost stories. And he's written about them in the book that he did. But I really want to get him telling them because he's kind of a really good raconteur.
He's a great storyteller.
He's a great storyteller. And I also want to get him on being recorded.
Yeah.
So I really want to do that. And also the American ghost story is really interesting. And his stories are like frontier horror.
Ooh.
And frontier horror is a whole different
It's a whole other beast.
Yes. And I really want to talk to him all about that.
That sounds fascinating.
Doesn't that sound fun?
I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. Well, thanks
all
a
right.
lot,
Well,
Jess.
thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.